Hello everyone, welcome back to AB-Aquariums. In this video I wanted to do a little bit of an in-depth talk about how to make the hobby a bit easier for you and measures you can take to make the hobby more enjoyable and less maintenance and seem like it's all just work and battling algae and things like that. So let's just jump straight into it with the ecosystem. Basically you're creating an ecosystem there, so you're not just creating a tank like days of old where it'd just be gravel or goldfish in a bowl or like a smallish tank and there'd be no other decor in there, definitely not live plants back in the day. And you know, your parents would probably take all the bits out the tank, scrub it all down in the sink, basically reset the tank, put it all back together, and then the tank's basically starting off fresh again. So gone are those days, thankfully, and we're creating little ecosystems. So as you can see here, there's plants everywhere, you know, stem plants in the back, epiphyte plants on the rock further forward, and then, you know, plants that run around and spread in the sand or gravel or whatever you've got, soil some people use, but you know, take your choice what you want to use for your substrate. But yeah, live plants are definitely the answer. So when you're starting off a new tank, you know, first things first, don't worry about putting fish in straight away. You know, leave that for a little while. Put live plants in, put plenty of plants in, not just one or two. Just, you know, cover the tank fairly well like this. And to be fair, you know, it won't cost you that much to do that. I mean, you can get a few pots of anubias and split it apart and maybe have a little bit less of it there. Luckily enough, I've been growing it in other tanks, so it's not too bad that I've been able to spread it about. But you can have a few pots of anubias or, you know, Java fern or whatever you want to use, stem plants. You can split the stem plants apart, put individual stems in the sand if you want, whichever you want to do. And, you know, just loads of plants, get them growing first over the first few weeks of starting the tank up, get everything growing in nicely, and then you can add a few shrimp and snails. If you're not having any large fish, you know, eventually if you're not going to have any large fish, you can add some snails and some small shrimp. You know, that's not a problem at all. Watch those for a while. You know, the shrimp aren't going to be adding any bioload really to the system, next to no bioload at all. So really, you know, the best thing you can do is add some little cleaners early on and get them working on the tank. If any algae starts turning up, they're going to graze on it and enjoy it, you know. So yeah, first things first, get some plants in the tank and don't add the fish straight away because you've got no bioload in the tank. You want to get the plants growing and get that little ecosystem starting off and let things establish for a little while first, even if it's a couple of weeks, you know, just to get things growing in there first. That's the first thing, plants. And the next thing is a lid. So in this case, I've used, you can barely see it, but it's quite a dark piece of polycarbonate. And it's pretty much the stuff I've used here. You can get clear stuff, you can get black stuff, you can get whichever you want to use, but I've used the black stuff because it's a little bit cheaper and it's a little bit thinner, so it kind of molds around any sort of, you know, air lines or anything you're coming out of the top of the tank, and it sort of, you know, it goes round the edges quite nicely. But I've used that, and that basically just stops any evaporation. It stops any fish jumping out of the tank, stops anything, you know, any mold, you know, any excess humidity in the house or any mold developing around the house. You know, nobody wants to see that, and then nobody wants to see a crusty fish on the floor, do they? So yeah, I definitely recommend having a lid on the tank. That's one of the first, something you're definitely going to consider at the start. I mean, it's all very well having rimless tanks and things like that, and having the water up to the brim and it looking like a piece of art or like a photo, you know. And it's all lovely and things like that, but do you really want your fish jumping out or getting spooked and sailing out the tank and you wake up to a fish on the floor crusty in the morning? Not very nice. So yeah, have a lid on your tank. In terms of filtration, you don't need to be getting power filters and fancy things like that. Yes, you can get canisters for better water quality, especially if you've got larger fish and they're going to be producing a lot more waste and there's going to be a lot more fines in the water. I have just fed, hence why there's quite a lot of fine particles in the water. I normally feed cyclops, frozen cyclops, because the white clouds love it. But yeah, I tend to use sponge filters in a lot of my tanks. I do have canisters on my large tanks with big old Oscars and things in there, you know, large fish in there that produce a lot of waste, because you're not going to get away with sponge filtration in a tank like that, not unless you want it to look rubbish. But biologically, you know, there's more than enough surface area and a sponge to do all the biological filtration, not to mention that all the sand, all the rock and the plants, everything else has got biofilm on it, all accumulating bacteria. It's not, the filter isn't the only place where the biological process takes place in breaking down ammonia and nitrites and things like that to get the end result of nitrates. You know, at the end of the day, it's your whole tank is a filter basically. So you don't need to have a canister filter and that be the only thing on it. You know, unless, like I said before, unless you've got really messy fish. But these small fish here, white clouds, you know, any tetras and things like that, things that produce very little waste, sponge filtration is going to be more than adequate to pull the fines out the water column. And then obviously it does actually, it purifies the water into even to the point where it makes it even nice and clear, you know, like gin clear, to the point where you can really see through. So yeah, I quite like the fact that the sponge filters polish the water as well. But yeah, adds aeration to the tank as well. Obviously, one of the main reasons you want to use it is for adding aeration. You know, the oxygen in the water adds a lot more surface movement, a lot more oxygen to the water, and that will only benefit the fish, especially at night when the plants are actually drawing in oxygen instead of producing it during the day when the light and photosynthesis happens. So yeah, definitely consider sponge filtration, because there's no moving parts. There's not really anything to go wrong apart from the air pump supplying it, which is very cheap to buy, but they do go on for years, to be fair, even though they're running all the time, and they're quite quiet. So yeah, they'll tend to glug when the sponges are blocked. So that's one way of indicating when to clean them, really. So I find them really simple to clean and service, and there's no moving parts apart from the air pump, obviously, but you know, they're just very simple filtration. So simplicity is key. The next thing, when you're doing water changes and things like that, consider using a hose, even a garden hose with a pump on the end of it, rather than using buckets and siphoning into buckets, which you can do on smaller tanks, because you know there's no reason why you can't do that. But even refilling the tank, using a hose on your kitchen faucet with one of those attachments that converts your faucet into a garden hose attachment. That's what I tend to use. It just clamps onto the faucet, and you can just literally use a garden hose with one of those hose lock quick connector things on it, and you just fill the tank and drain the tank with your pump, and it's just so much easier using a hose than lugging buckets around the house. So definitely consider using hoses and things like that, rather than having to struggle on with buckets and lugging 30 litres of water around in one arm. It's just, you just don't really need it, do you? Especially if you've got multiple tanks. So yeah, definitely consider using a hose and a pump for draining the water and filling it. A Wi-Fi timer, which is, you know, what, they're 10 quid, something like that, to get your lighting schedule bang on, you know, 8 or 9, 10, 12 hours a day, however long you want to do it. I'm doing this one for 9 hours a day, and it just speaks for itself. You know, everything grows in well, and you know, the plants know where they stand. They're getting a consistent amount of light every day. At the same time, you know, mine come on at 12 and they go off at 9 at night. So you're getting the time to enjoy the tank while you're actually home, unless you do, you know, different shifts. But yeah, you can set your lighting schedule for when you're actually home, rather than just flicking the light on when you want to see the tank. And then the plants aren't going to get used to that, and they're not going to grow very well. So yeah, get a consistent lighting schedule for every single day, and your plants will grow lovely. The next thing to have is something I do struggle with, and that's patience. And that's something it's really hard to have when you're a new fish keeper, especially with your first tank. You've never had anything before, aquatic wise, in your house, and you really just want to get everything in the tank now, you know, and I completely understand that, because I've been there myself. But especially if you've got multiple tanks, but you know, if you can try and just learn the patience, which this hobby will teach you, to be patient. Like, get the tank all set up, get all the sand in, get the rocks in, or gravel, whichever you want to use, wood, whatever you want to use, get all the live plants in, and just leave it be. Get, like I was saying before, get a load of snails, get a load of shrimp in there, not a load, but you know, a nice little group of each, and just watch the life develop. You know, you'll see little worms and things in the substrate if you look really close enough. If you look really close enough, I mean, but yeah, you get little worms, you know, start to appear. Like obviously the snails will be doing their work, cleaning up algae on the glass and on the rocks, and obviously the shrimp were doing their little things like picking away at all the little bits of algae. But yeah, just watch the life for a few weeks, up to a month. You know, just let the plants start to grow. Take a few photos, you know, early on, and look back at the photos, and then a few weeks on, look at the photo, you know, look at the tank again, and you'll see the plants have grown a good few inches, and you'll be like, oh right, well at least the plants are growing. And they're starting to establish. The plants will grow from some of the nutrition that's already in your tap water that you've dechlorinated, obviously, but you can start adding fertilizers a few weeks in when the plants start to get established, and they've used up everything in the water. Test the water. Get one of those liquid test kits and test where your parameters are. You know, make sure you've got no ammonia and nitrite after 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then obviously you know you're in a good place to maybe start getting fish. But you know, test the water. Even those little dipsticks, they give you a rough idea of where you're at. They take about like 2 seconds to test the water, and you can see roughly where your parameters are at. But you'll have a good idea if you test the water good few weeks in, and then you'll know that your plants either need fertilizing, a little bit of extra nutrition if the nitrates are under, you know, 20 to 40 parts per million. If they're getting, you know, if they've absorbed all the nitrates out of the water, there's a good chance that they've absorbed all the other minerals out of the water. So yeah, definitely consider getting some fertilizers. and a test kit to see where your parameters are at, to then know when it's time to add fish. So yeah, you don't want any ammonia in there, you don't want any nitrates. You've probably already gone through a lot of cycling videos and you've got a rough idea of what the score is in terms of cycling your tank. But yeah, that's definitely something you want to consider, is testing the water and fertilising it for the plants. Yeah, it will say on the bottle what to do. It'll be like a weekly amount you dose to the tank. And it's easy because a lot of them have got these little pump heads on them and it's just easy to dose. I use the tropical one over here because it's probably one of the best ones we can get in the UK, because we can't get a lot of the other ones you can get overseas. But yeah, I tend to use the tropical one, the green one that comes with the nitrates. You can get the brown one that doesn't have any nitrates in it, which is probably more ideal if you're really feeding heavy to the tank for the type of fish you keep and you're already producing a lot of nitrates. But yeah, consider the fertilising and make sure you test your water fairly regularly, just to know roughly where you're at. It doesn't have to be a fancy kit, just like I say, the dipsticks will do, give you a rough idea where you're at. But most of all, the most important thing you want to do is enjoy the tank. You know, you can spend all the time in the world being a mad scientist and start dosing things and testing things, which, you know, is good practice to do anyway, like I was saying before. But it's very important to enjoy your tank and enjoy the little ecosystem you've created, because it really is a wonderful thing. You know, it's not rocket science to do, and you can literally do it with the water that you drink out your tap, you know, with a little bit of dechlorinator that you can stick in, or you can gas it off yourself in a bucket with an air stone. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of chloramines in the water nowadays, so it's just as easy to get a bottle of dechlorinator in it and just pour it in, put that water in your tank, do regular water changes weekly, you know, maybe 20% a week, 10-20%, just to know that you're getting some fresh water in there. You know, like I say, test the water. But yeah, you know, you're creating an ecosystem. You don't need to be doing crazy drastic changes. Just let everything grow in. Let it all do what it wants to do. Let the algae grow on the rocks, let it grow on the glass. And yeah, obviously clean the panels that you want to see through, the glass panels you want to see through. In this tank, I've only got one panel that isn't like blacked out, so that's the choice I've made on this tank. But at the end of the day, it's one panel I have to clean with the scraper, the magnet scraper, and the rest of the glass gets cleaned by snails and shrimp. So yeah, I'll leave it be. I'll leave the rest of the tank ticking along and doing its thing. But yeah, just consider those things I mentioned, and like I say, enjoy the tank, enjoy the process. You know, don't rush it. Try not to rush it, because I've been guilty of that as well. You rush it, you get to the end point, you're like, oh, it's done now. But enjoy the process and watch it grow in, because it's never really finished, is it? It's always growing and changing and new life appearing. You might add some more fish along the way, new plants, maybe trim the plants back. You know, watch everything grow in. So yeah, I hope you've found something useful out this video, and I've not just blabbered on the whole time, which I probably have, because I usually do. But yeah, hope it's been a little bit more of use to you, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.